Well, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the ARC of Massachusetts webinar series. My name is Carrie Mahoney, and today I will be the moderator for this workshop. We do have a couple of notes just before we begin. If any of you are having any problems with accessing either the voice or the screen of the PowerPoint, please just log off and log back on. That usually takes care of everything. We're expecting a very large group today, so I have muted all of you upon entry. We will be using the chat pane for questions at the end of the session, and we'll have plenty of time, not to worry. So if you could all just chat into me to make sure you know how to use the chat screen. I'm going to type a message to you all. Great. All right, looks like we're all set there, so that's great. So you can just chat in questions. We'll make sure that you get them answered. So it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker and for our webinar today. Her name is Alexandria Nadworny, or Alex. And Alex is a financial planner with Special Needs Financial Planning. It's by Shepherd Financial Partners as their host agency. But many of you may recognize Alex's name. Her dad and their co-partner, Cindy Haddad, have been, just really on top of financially planning for people with disabilities and what families can do. So one of the most critical areas we hear is all on housing. How do you afford it? What are the options? What are all these kind of services and that sort of thing and benefits people can access? So I'm going to have Alex take it away and hopefully enlighten us on how we can go forward and get some housing plan going for our kids. All right, so thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Carrie. And Carrie and I go way back. I actually have a little brother with Down syndrome, and Carrie was pretty instrumental in helping our family and pulling us all together and family support and you name it throughout the years. So the ARC of Massachusetts, I'm very happy to be presenting this today. And I also recognize a lot of names that are saying hello. So please, if we have kind of limited time today, but if anybody has any questions whatsoever following up from this webinar, please do not hesitate to reach out to me. Our contact information will be at the end of these slides, or if you go to our website, you see the phone number and emails on there. So, Carrie, if you don't mind just moving to the next slide.
Sure. Not letting me, but hold on.
I'm really good at talking too, so.
Okay.
Great. So this is today's agenda. Like Carrie mentioned, our special needs planning team, there's 3 of us, Cindy, John Nadworny, who's my father, and myself. I joined the firm about 7 years ago after working with a few other advisors, and now I'm really focused on working with families like my own. Like I mentioned, we all have family members, and Cindy actually recently went through a housing transition for her brother Ron, which I'll talk a little bit about the process that she went through, and she actually worked really closely with the ARC support brokers too, which can be really helpful in kind of helping you navigate this. But today's agenda, what I'm going to be focusing on is the special needs planning timeline. I think it's always helpful to start with the basics, kind of see where you guys have all been through the different planning pressure points, starting from birth until today. The 5 factors of special needs planning. So today we are going to be focusing on housing, but kind of in any area of planning for our loved ones, we can categorize into what we call these 5 factors. The next is framework for financial planning. So from when looking at your financial planning, every single person's situation is different, but this is going to be a helpful kind of tool to help you obviously focus your time. The next is understanding the basics. I'm also going to be going over some different housing examples, and then we'll allow for some time for questions and answers. And then also, just briefly, you see a picture here. This is a special needs planning guide. So this is a book that John and Cindy wrote a few years ago. They're in the process of updating it. That is a really helpful tool for families to kind of figure out, overall financial planning for their loved one. And it is broken up by the special needs planning timeline, which I think is helpful because you don't have to waste, your time kind of looking at things that maybe you already went through, like early intervention, for example. So Carrie, if you don't mind moving to the next. Perfect. So in planning, again, like I mentioned, every single person and every single family situation is different. So it's really important for you to understand what your personal balance is. So there are government resources that are out there, and there are also your own personal resources. And your child's needs and abilities are always going to be different as well. So kind of planning how much can you depend on for the government resources, what do those government resources pay for, and what personal resources do you have for your lifetime and for your child's lifetime, and what will those resources potentially pay for. And this is what we call the special needs planning timeline. I think this is really helpful to just identify where you are in your planning, because then you can really help to, again, figure out what's coming up to make sure you're not doing anything that could potentially disqualify your child for benefits in the future. But kind of going back, looking at early intervention. So that's, when your child is born up to age 3. A lot of you probably have gone through this. Imagine your children a little bit older if you're thinking about housing, but I always say it's never too early and never too late to plan. So then you go to the school system. My mom always kind of teased and said that going from early intervention into the education system is kind of like going from a cruise ship to a buoy, because you're really, early intervention was really around the entire family. What does everybody need? Then moving to the school system, obviously that really was, making sure that the planning was done for your child. It's really important because the education entitlement is one of the biggest entitlements that your children will ever receive. There are laws that have been passed that require that they're in not only a safe environment, but an environment that is enriching their overall life and, setting different goals. So really important at that age 14 in Massachusetts to start talking to the school about the plan for transition. So are they going to be focusing their time on, vocational skills? Are they going to be focusing their time on life skills? Really important in kind of planning for housing that you work with them for some independent life skills. And this can be incorporated into the school system as well to help them to become as independent as possible. Because what that means, obviously, the more independent they are as they get older, potentially the smaller the support costs would be to kind of make this a bit more affordable. So kind of having those annual meetings at least with the school system to develop a plan, really depends on what your child wants and what their needs are, and maybe consider a person-centered plan to kind of help figure out, where they'd want to live, what they want to do, and what types of skills would be really helpful for them during that transition. The next big planning pressure point is that age 18. I'm going to be talking about a lot of different benefits that are out there, and mostly focusing on the federal benefits, but of course talking about those state benefits as well. But age 18 is when your child is technically no longer a child. They would then be eligible for some different federal benefits that can help in your long-term plan for housing. So looking at SSI, Medicaid, is your child going to be going to college? Are other children going to be going to college? How are you going to be able to financially plan for that as well? Then the next big pressure point is that age 22. That is when your child is aging out of the school system. Really important that if they are still at the school, that that you continue maybe getting some service until the age of 22, really making sure that maybe you don't collect that diploma quite as early, or kind of, talking with folks to make sure that they continue to receive those supports up until the age of 22. And then at that point, that's when they would then be introduced to a state agency, which again, I'm going to be talking more about, that will be able to provide potentially some support for employment, residential, and et cetera, et cetera. Then a parent then retires. It says age 65 here. I think people are working a bit longer now. People are living a lot longer, which is also a good thing. So, kind of factoring in what those income streams are going to be in the future. So from Social Security, retirement, then moving on, looking at your estate and how it potentially going to be distributed. A lot of people kind of worry more. What's going to happen when I'm no longer here? We always say parents should put their face masks on first. And when you're on an airplane and they say, you want to make sure that you're in an okay financial shape, because if you're not in an okay financial shape, it's going to be really difficult for you to be able to potentially supplement your child. So the priority should be you, and making sure that you have those resources potentially. And then how do you distribute them? You know, another question that's often asked is if you have multiple children, you know, do you divide it 50-50? Kind of different things to think about really, you know, in the future. So Carrie, if you don't mind going to the next. So these are the 5 factors of special needs financial planning. And, you know, we spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to visualize this because they are all a part of your overall plan. They overlap. One may be pressing during a specific time. You know, like you think of the age of 18, well, government benefits is really when you want to, you know, at the age of 18, you'll be focusing on making sure that your child is receiving the benefits that they may be entitled to based on different criteria. Or, you know, the financial factors, parents are going to retire. They want to make sure they have the correct amount of resources available, looking at potentially purchasing a home for their child. You know, how much should they put down for a down payment? What are, you know, what types of assets should you potentially take that down payment from? Retirement, non-retirement, and so forth. The emotional factors. I think that especially when you're thinking about housing, this is just so emotional. How will you have your child move out? You know, I know for me, and I know a lot of you, so you probably have heard me say this before, but my brother absolutely adores music. So when I go to my parents' house, I know that what to expect. The house is going to be shaking because the music is blasting and he's dancing his little feet away. So, you know, it's very hard for us to imagine walking into that door and not hearing that music rocking. But at some point, he will want to potentially move out. And my family has kind of done some planning, which I'm going to talk about as well, to plan for that day, looking at those other factors. The family and support, that's also a really huge factor when it comes to planning for housing. Who is going to replace all that you do for your loved one? I know my dad helps to shave my brother every single night. He loves that job. But who will be the one to do that if my dad's not there tucking him in every single night? You know, who are the different people that are going to be taking him from, you know, from what he does during the day, different volunteering, his different jobs, to where he lives now, or different, you know, Special Olympics is coming up for all of you that are going to be there next weekend, you know, kind of figuring out all of that. The legal. So if you purchase a home, are you purchasing a home? Are you going to be, is your child going to be renting maybe a unit? You know, are there different families involved? Are there different contracts involved? Also looking at the different types of guardianship, alternatives to guardianship. You know, what types of documents or potential items need to be in place to protect your child from a medical or a financial perspective. So next. So the next item, breaking down those different 5 factors, and be focusing on a couple of them today, mostly the government benefits and the financial factors. So really important for everyone to just understand the way that the government benefits work. So there are entitlement programs and non-entitlement programs. The entitlement programs are the ones that are funded by the federal government. These are the ones that you can really depend on once your child turns age 18, assuming that they do not have or have very minimal assets and income and have a disability, or a disability from, you know, the terms of Social Security, which is, you know, not really being able to be gainfully employed. Then the next are those non-entitlements. Those are the benefits that are funded by the state government by appropriation. So those are the different programs like from DDS, DMH, MCB, Mass Commission for the Blind, Department of Developmental Services, you name it, all those different state agencies, those different acronyms that you all are so familiar with, that's funded by the state government. So it's really important that you advocate. So the ARC of Massachusetts does a fabulous job breaking down the budget every single year. So important for you to kind of, again, understand that. So the next, let's go back, perfect. So the next, breaking down those federal government benefits, you want to make sure that your child does not have more than $2,000 in their name. So that would make them eligible for the SSI, the Supplemental Security Income. And what that is a monthly income benefit that they can receive, again, assuming they do not have any income or assets in their name. And it really depends on also their living situation, depending on how much that they would receive. There are ways to potentially have them receive a little bit more, even if they are living at home with you, if they are able to pay their fair share, or if you are charging them rent and for their food. So I'm happy to talk a little bit more about that after. It's a little bit specific for each person, but important to know there is a way to potentially get more than that, like the $500 that people are typically receiving when their child is living at home with them, because Social Security is assuming that they're paying their fair share. So really important, SSI. The next is Medicaid Mass Health. So when your child applies for SSI, they're automatically also enrolled in Medicaid, which is the federal, it's a federal program that's state administered, so you may have heard of Mass Health. The next is premium reimbursement or premium assistance. So if your child is on Medicaid and also on your family plan, you may be able to receive a reimbursement for some premium payments. The Federation for Children with Special Needs is really helpful in kind of walking through the application process and maybe even looking at your insurance that you have through your employer to see if they would be eligible for the premium reimbursement. So what I'm trying to do right now is figure out how much potential resources you can get from the government to then be able to supplement what you can provide personally to be able to create this home for your child. So I know I'm kind of focusing on these government benefits, but really trying to figure out how you can get some more income flow. So these are really helpful from a cash flow perspective, because obviously the support costs, the housing costs are recurring expenses, not just a one-time down payment, for example, but many times these different support costs and many housing expenses, again, are recurring. So these are also, this is income streams that you potentially can get into the household. The next is the adult family care or personal care assistance. You can only access one of these. It really depends on what your child's needs are. So typically, if they are medically complex, that they would potentially receive more hours through a PCA. Sometimes they're a little bit less flexible. Again, it's really family specific. Suggest maybe reaching out to one of the ARCs that does administer these programs to have them, evaluate your child and kind of have a conversation with you as well. So adult family care, kind of focusing a little bit more on that, is a monthly stipend, tax-free, that a family member or someone living with your child could receive for providing care for their activities of daily living. So there's two different levels, the level 1 and level 2, but it can be quite substantial, around $1,200 or $800 a month that if that person could receive. The reason for this is really to try to keep that child, at home. It actually stemmed from many, many years ago from elder programs that tried to have, these adult elders living at home and having their children potentially receive some income for that. The next is a Section 8 housing subsidy. And that is potentially can help to pay for rent. So it's really important that, if your child is age 18, that they go on to potentially the centralized list. I know a lot of people have questions around Section 8. The voucher is kind of the most common and typical, the one that people often just apply for right away. But I also suggest going down to your local housing authority if your town has one, especially if your child is actively looking at moving out of your family home, and talk to them about other affordable housing options. An example of this could be a project-based voucher. Maybe there is a condo building, as we all seen on the Boston, skyline the past several years. There's a lot of building going on, and when there's new buildings, there also are requirements for a certain percentage of them to be affordable. So if you go down to a local housing authority, they may say, yes, there is a unit that is available for someone that falls into that criteria. So really kind of having the people down at your local housing authority know your child and know that that's what you guys are looking for. You may find an opportunity, closer to home. The vouchers tend to be the most flexible. So you could even potentially rent to your child if you did have a separate apartment. You cannot rent to your child in the same home as you, because you would have to fall under those income and asset thresholds as well. But if you did have a unit, for example, my parents did, was they converted the basement of the family home into an apartment for my little brother. And the reason for that was because he ended up actually getting a Section 8 voucher pretty, we weren't really ready yet. My parents bought a multifamily thinking that one day James may live in one of the units, but even if not, it was really around the income stream that could be generated from that property to pay for James's future support costs. So kind of going back to that conversation though, my parents, they got the voucher. If you don't use it, you lose it. I wouldn't be concerned about applying for this Section 8 voucher though at your child's 18th birthday, because they do say potentially there is a 10-year waiting list. Obviously this could be more and less. It's really hard to tell. So you could get, again, a Section 8 voucher. So they redid the basement into an apartment. Also, each town has different zoning rules. So really important that you do talk to the housing authority as well and the different zoning boards of your town before making any changes to your home. But this is a way to kind of, maybe even have some independent life skills for your child. If you do live in a duplex, maybe you own the second side. Again, you can rent to your child and maybe even receive a Section 8 voucher for 2 rooms if your child needs additional support, so needs someone living in the home. The next are those entitlements, the SSDI. So those are the Social Security, Medicare, and veterans. So really important you kind of maximize those different programs. Can go to the next. So this is just an example. If you look at SSI, so that could be about $9,000 a year, potentially receiving about $15,000 a year for a Section 8, and AFC about $1,300. So potentially your child could receive around $3,300 a month that could help go towards some type of housing. So now kind of saying, well, what types of housing? Obviously finding the people and different roommates, if they want roommates, is sometimes the hardest part. And many times the support costs are more than $1,300 a month. If your child needs 24/7 care, that could just be enough maybe to pay for 1 week of care, if that. So there is kind of a process that you go through, but as you can see, this can be quite substantial, especially over time. So even if it's just the AFC and SSI, that could be $2,000 a month that you could receive and save for the future for these different goals of housing. And the next is when you apply for, when you go through the 688 transition plan. So that's when you go from the school system into the adult service world. It's called the 688 transition. And then you will, at that point, know what state agency your son or daughter will be working with. So if it's DDS, that has the largest budget. They do the most residential for folks across the state. So they do provide residential supports through group homes, shared living, individualized supports, which I will be talking more about. DMH is Department of Mental Health. More and more people are now being served by both DDS and DMH, Mass Commission for the Blind or Mass Rehab Commission. Mass Rehab Commission is really kind of a short term. So if your son or daughter needs assistance with occupation, so kind of maybe filling out a resume, maybe getting an interview, some interview skills, they'd be supported through MRC. DDS is, again, the one that really provides a lot of the residential support. If you never talk to DDS that your child wants to move out of the home, they will never come to you and say, hey, there's an opening. Do you want your child to move out? Are they looking to move out? Really important that you have very open communication with your DDS case coordinator and they have a nice relationship with them so that they understand and they know what your child's goals are. One thing you may consider doing that I know I mentioned briefly before, but would be a person-centered plan to get people into a room that know and care and and love your child, and talk to them, everyone, about where would your son or daughter want to live. Obviously, the whole purpose of this, though, is to focus on the individual with special needs. Cindy, the one we worked with many years ago, she kind of teased and said, yeah, we were all ready. We were planning for my brother to have him live with 3 other people, thinking he would love it. He's a pretty social guy. And he came back and said, what are you guys thinking? I only want to have 1 roommate. I don't want to live with 3 other people. And so that's, they kind of squashed that plan many years ago. He ended up living in an apartment building with 1 other person, and there were 2 other people underneath him that also received some individualized support, so received some hours throughout the day. And now that her brother is aging, he's having a little bit more health needs, so they are actually moving him to a different housing place. he's going to be moving into a specialized housing home, which has been around for a long, long time. One of the first agencies to actually accept private dollars. So they're buying him a condo. So her brother was fortunate. He worked for many, many years. He even has a pension. So he was able to go and purchase a room in one of these condos, and he's now going to be provided by them. So they have an ongoing kind of support that they're paying for every single month. But that is one kind of agency that does a lot of individual housing. So specialized housing is one. So that's kind of the service providers, knowing who's out there that does provide residential supports. You do have to be prioritized for housing through DDS. So once your child turns age 22, DDS will likely tell you if you're priority 1 or priority 2. Priority 1 means that your child will receive housing. You know, you kind of have to find housing for them. It's not like there's, you know, you kind of want to make sure it's a good situation for them. So it can take a little bit of time. But usually if the person has a home to go, you know, to, and it's a safe home and they're not going to harm themselves or harm someone else, and there's no real, you know, safety issues, then DDS typically does not provide for housing. It really is, there's just so many people across the state that have potentially safety issues that they're not able to go and live with a family home, and sadly just not enough dollars across the state to provide for everyone that wants to move out of their family home with those types of supports. So again, it's really important that you talk to DDS about, yes, this is our goal, work with your children to really get those different skills, so then when they get older, they may be able to have the opportunity to move out, which may be a combination of DDS dollars and the family's dollars. So DDS typically will provide for like a day program, something during the day, maybe employment help, different supports like that. So you don't have to worry what are they going to be doing all day long. But again, it's really important that you work with your transition specialist at school and DDS to kind of come up with what is the best day for them. What does that look like? So we can move to the next. So that now looking at the financial factors. And I'm just going to answer one of these questions. So yes, when a parent retires, it does switch to SSDI, which is also less strict when it comes to assets and income. But we also want to be very mindful of the Medicaid benefit, because that is very, very important and pays for a lot of supports for individuals. So we typically suggest that you do keep the assets and income down, even if they are on SSDI. But that does jump to 50% of the parent's Social Security. So that's why it's really important that parents, you know, contribute to Social Security if they're able to. And then when a parent passes away, it jumps to 75% of the parent's SSDI benefit will go to the child. There are very complex total household rules around there. So again, it is specific to each family, but big picture, 50%. So looking at the financial factors, so looking at your own financial security, will there be enough money? How much money will it take from our child to have a good life, and where will the money come from? So people often ask us, how much money do I need to be able to leave to my child for them to have a great life? And it really depends on your family situation, because as we all know, money does not buy happiness. What really buys happiness is obviously the time that you spend with your children, the things that you all do together, the people that are in part of their lives. You know, I always tease and say I could give my brother $1 million or a can of Coke, and he would much, much prefer the can of Coke, even though recently he's been learning. We've been teaching him the value of $1, and I can't believe he's been taking my dollar bills recently. It's a good and a bad thing. So looking at where a family should spend their time. So a family of limited means, a way you can kind of consider that is a family that maybe is not able to save anything on a weekly or monthly basis. So they're kind of living paycheck to paycheck. So what that family should really do is focus on those government benefits. Of course, making sure they're accessing every single government benefit that we listed earlier, the federal, and making sure that they're advocating as much as possible and working very close with the DDS coordinator. Again, this does not mean that their child's not going to have a great life, just means most of the different benefits will come from the government. And to make sure you're continuing to advocate. A family of modest wealth, this is a family that, is maybe able to save some money every single, month, able to potentially retire and have something that they could supplement their child with. Maybe they hire a companion to take their children out a couple times a month, or once a month, you name it. Really depends. Maybe they hire a massage therapist. Maybe they hire someone to kind of help them figure out what the different goals that they want for the future. They can kind of supplement what the government's providing. So they're in a potentially a shared living environment. Maybe they're receiving some different day supports, and the family's supplementing. Family of significant wealth, and this again, it all depends, because you could have a child that has extremely high needs, and a family even of extremely high net worth would not be able to pay for everything that child would need. So it really is a balance between what are the different needs of the individual, what are the different needs of the family, and what resources are out there. So kind of striking a balance and where you should be spending your time. So a family maybe of significant wealth will be paying for the majority of the residential supports, but their child would be supported in the day by DDS. So, I think even being able to leave something into a trust or into an account for your child in the future will help to make their life better, be able to get them things above what the government would be able to provide. Because yes, there are a lot of people right now living in group homes, and many times we get phone calls saying, well, I really am not able to spend anything. We're not really sure where these government benefits are going, or government programs are going to go, where they're going to go in the future. So it's important to kind of have something outside, just so then you can have maybe even eyes just checking in on your son or daughter. We have worked with a lot of consultants that maybe their child is being served by an agency and living in a home, and they have someone come and visit and check in on them and report back to the family. One situation, the bed was a little bit too short. The family was all out of state. The parents have since passed away. So we realized, what? He needs a bigger bed. He's really a tall guy. And then they were able to use the personal dollars to get him a bigger bed that was more appropriate for his tall height. And Carrie, if you don't mind, just moving to the next slide. So here is some different residential planning needs. So kind of looking at where would your child live, the physical residence. So there, I'm going to take a step back and kind of talk about some different types of housing. And how creative different families can be and have been. I spoke with someone a few months ago about using a tiny home, and I actually just I read an article recently by Disability Scoop that a lot of people are now doing these different tiny homes. So I thought that was very unique, in that the child could be close to the parents. They'd be maybe even in the driveway, in the backyard, but in his own space, his own tiny home. Pretty affordable if you compare that to other homes, especially in this area, and teaching him a lot of independent skills. And he's feeling extremely independent because he's not under mom and dad's roof, even if he is in the driveway. It is, very close where he's learning his own skills. And they even tease his dream job was to go down to Disney, that they would take him in his tiny home down to Disney over the winter and have him work down there. So I think thinking a little bit outside of the box, I know I really like to watch HGTV, and I know that we all can kind of live in either an apartment or a condo, maybe in a multifamily, a duplex, a single home. So really, I think it's easy to kind of get caught up on the physical structure, because when we think of living in a home, we kind of think of, well, is it going to be a house, going to be a home? But we all have probably lived in one of these, or maybe all of these, throughout our lifetime. And then also recognizing that even if your children were to move out of the home, it doesn't mean that's going to be where they live forever. So also don't worry about having something that maybe is situated for them or for you when you were in your late 90s. You can always make modifications, so that is okay too. And often people go out and maybe even purchase a home without really having anything else in place, because that's a step potentially maybe in the right direction of being able to create a home. But you really want to make sure that you're not putting yourself into a position where you're not able to carry another home. Kind of finding a house, especially nowadays, is not as difficult as it may seem to be. So I think kind of looking at the physical structure last. really focusing on what types of supports does your child need. One option may be to get an evaluation done. So maybe there's some different ARCs that do offer evaluations. You can pay for someone to come and, watch your child. Are they safe in the kitchen? Do they need someone to be with them? Do they need hand over hand supports? What types of supports do they need to be able to live in the home? Are they able to get up in the morning, get ready? One thing that I think is helpful for you to kind of list out, well, what do I do for my son or daughter every single day? Do you wake them up? Do you put their clothes out? Would they be able to do that without you there? I know a lot of times people, like my brother, for the longest time, my dad thought that he couldn't put his shoes on himself, but he could. But my dad would do it for him, so why wouldn't he have my dad do it, right? So I think it's really helpful too, when you go to that person-centered plan, that you kind of listen to other people, because a lot of times, our family members maybe are more independent than we realize. The next is to look at those different, supplemental needs. So a lot of times those ongoing residential support needs could be paid for by DDS, again, if you are prioritized, or you would have to figure out what types of staff do you need, and that would be potentially a private pay program that you would be in, using SSI, maybe using the AFC if the care provider is living in your child's home. The next are those supplemental needs. So typically those supplemental needs are things that a parent or a trust or something would pay for outside of the government. Usually when they're in a group home, they do use a large percentage of the SSI goes to the agency to provide for a lot of these, provide for the supports. And maybe they have additional hobbies, other things that they would like to do, travel home to visit family and friends, that would come from another type of area. You can kind of see on the bottom here, typically the most expensive items are those ongoing support needs and the ongoing employment, the day services, which again, a little bit outside of the housing, but if your child's not doing something during the day, obviously they would need someone potentially to be with them, again, depending on their independent skills. We can move to the next. So again, this kind of just briefly goes over those different types of funding options. So do you take out a mortgage or do they rent? We went and talked to some different agencies. They had a little bit of pushback saying, well, if we're going to potentially accept private dollars from families, what happens if they run out of money? So this is a private pay housing situation. So a family has resources, is looking to hire an agency to provide those individualized supports within the home. One pushback was, well, what happens again if the family runs out of money? Well, let's maybe instead of buying a home, let's rent. Let's see if that works for a little bit of time. And again, nothing is forever. It's okay. Maybe if they don't, again, do something that's forever, but kind of figuring out what supports are needed, a little bit of trial and error is always okay. So kind of figuring out all these different resources. So going over some of the different types of residential options that are out there. Again, I mentioned briefly the tiny home. I know one family I talked to, they actually had a multi-family close by a college. They ended up having their son or daughter living in this, one of the bedrooms near this college and renting to college students. So the son or daughter was pretty, was pretty independent, but did need someone to oversee everything. So they were able to have the different college students get a reduced rent and provide some kind of oversight and check in with the parents every once in a while. And that worked out really well when the child was young, kind of in her 20s. And she was then able to kind of, as she got older, maybe moving into a different type of residential home with people that maybe aren't kind of as active as these college students. And then the next is, a shared living. So that would be when you actually are able to have someone living, in the home with your son or daughter. Shared living is a DDS program, but people are doing it using AFC. So having a caregiver live in a home with your son or daughter, and they would receive the AFC caregiver stipend, and then maybe you would supplement them with some additional, payments depending on the level of supports and time that they're needed to help your child. But that kind of is an option too. So maybe it's living with one person, maybe it's living with a young couple, maybe it's living with the whole family. You name it. Really depends on what that person wants. So those are some very common kind of the shared living, the group homes, which is I think people are most familiar with, where there's staff, it's overseen by an agency, and staff comes in and checks on, the individual. Usually there's maybe a person there overnight awake. And if folks are really looking for the different housing options that are out there, and your child is maybe an adult right now, maybe approaching that, you may consider joining the Citizen Advisory Board through the Department of Developmental Services. I talk a lot about this because I think it's really helpful to understand the way that DDS works, and to get to know the different people that oversee the agency that are in your local office as well. And you actually go and visit group homes and kind of check in as a citizen of Massachusetts, being a taxpayer, kind of go in, check and see how things are going, talk with people that work at that agency. And I think it's a good way to kind of see the difference between one agency and another. And doesn't mean it's good or bad. I think people just have different fits. Some people really like that there's a really big agency because there's a lot of staff. Maybe people like a smaller agency, has more of a homey feel. Again, it really depends on what your family's vision is and what your child's vision is for the future. So those are kind of some, big picture housing options. Again, I think it's a process that you go through though with your child to kind of figure out where do they want to live, just like you would kind of figure out. And Carrie, if you want to move to the next slide, where someone wants to go. So we always say kind of look at those negotiables and the non-negotiables. So, when you're kind of thinking of where you want to live, do you want to live in a city near public transportation? If so, maybe trying to see if they could get some public transportation, training done. Who do they want to live with? Just like that story I mentioned with Cindy, her brother really didn't want to live with a lot of people. He wanted to live with just him and one other person. So that's, where he ended up moving to. But, without that conversation, a lot of times parents kind of think, well, I know best. Obviously you've raised your children their entire lifetimes, and you probably spend the most time with them than anyone else. So it's common, I think, and it's often, especially as parents, to kind of think that they know what their children want. One thing that I think is really helpful too is to kind of do what we call like a community map. So what you do is you actually go out into your neighborhood and walk around, or go to a place where you think that your child may want to live, and kind of go around and see where can they begin to build their community, because you really want these natural supports and paid supports, because obviously that will make this much more cost effective. If you have people kind of checking in on them that don't need to be paid or that aren't paid, it can kind of help to have a more longer term, I think, plan in place, because unfortunately there is very high turnover. So by building the community that your child has, it can be very helpful. And then kind of looking at what they're doing during the day, what are they doing at night, how much support. Again, I think it's really helpful for you all to just go down and write what you do every single day. And not only just for housing, but also when thinking of, we talk a lot about building a team to carry on. So obviously that has to do with where they live, but also who's going to be involved in their life in the future, and kind of helping you to build this overall team that consists of family, friends, neighbors, again, paid staff, non-paid staff, and folks like that. So who's going to be the one providing support? Agency. I think a lot of parents sometimes stress, well, when my child turns age 22, they want to move out of the home. We want to rush. A lot of times it takes a bit of time to get them transition from the routine of going to school every single day to then transitioning to a different day program. So my brother is 28, and he recently, probably 6 months ago, maybe a little bit longer than that, transitioned to his third agency for his day services. So, I think the focus many times is kind of around what are they going to be do during the day. We often suggest that they have, my mom actually joined the Rotary and found some different job opportunities for him. They started off as volunteering, and now he's actually earning an income and can contribute potentially to his overall housing costs sometime down in the future. I think a lot of children now, when they graduate from college, even the typical quote, children are moving back to their parents' home. So it's okay. I wouldn't be stressed. Thinking of this magical age of 22, I think it takes, again, some time for us and our children to get all situated. So looking at the different types of home, again, really doesn't matter. But if your children really don't want to walk up or, aren't able to walk up many stairs, maybe a single level home makes the most sense, looking at their current needs and wants at this time. Go to the next one. So, and then, I think I'm a very kind of tangible person. I think that figuring out housing is very complex. There's a lot of different rolling parts that go along with it. So what are some different things that you can do today to start thinking about housing in the future? So one is create that vision. Start with a person-centered plan. I think the ARC of Massachusetts does a great job. The support brokers do a great job at doing these person-centered plans, putting a plan in place that has actionable items for the future to move you and your family and your child towards that goal of creating a home. Are they going to be focusing on some independent life skills today? Are they able to, get up in the morning and put their shoes on and pick out their clothes? So those types of things will really be helpful in that long-term goal of having your child live outside of the family home. The next is establish a budget. If they are going to be moving out of the home, again, going back to how much supports do they need? Are they going to be living with other family members? Are they going to be living with, another professional, maybe care providers? Is an agency going to be providing those supports? If so, and if you're thinking about this as something in the near term, you may want to start interviewing different agencies to see if they would be able to provide supports. Maybe even start with having someone come into your family home and help you at home with what their needs are, and maybe that can teach them to be a little bit more independent, so then when they do move out, maybe the overall cost for a family is less. The next is networking. So really important, because if you think that your child may be moving out of the family home, many times they do have a roommate that they may be living with. So you want to make sure that whomever you're thinking about, that they would want to live with that person. So the best place to start networking is probably at school, maybe in the same community that you're in now, same ages. Maybe they've spent some time together, and have them spend even more time together. I know there's a couple different situations where families got together, the parents got along really well, like, yes, exactly what we're going to do. They introduced all the children, and the first meeting they could tell, wow, this is probably not going to work. So really important that you kind of focus on that, building those different relationships. The next is then develop that plan. So, develop the budget for your overall family as well, to see what you need, and is that going to be sustainable? So is that going to be able to continue kind of now and in the future? We have a housing checklist that I can actually send over to Carrie, that she can send off to everyone, that kind of goes through a checklist of a lot of what I talked about today, to help you, again, go through those 5 different factors and start to get all of your items in order for that goal of having your child live outside of the family home. So again, I think I talked a lot up today about, kind of money, the overall money in general, but it really is about, creating that great life, which hope I talked a bit about, because that obviously is what we all want for our family members, is for them to be as happy and, be members of the community, participating and contributing to the community. So, I think there's a lot for families to think about, kind of tying all of these different pieces together. And finding the right support team. So I also think that another item that I know I mentioned briefly is building a team to carry on. None of this can be done overnight. It's a process. It's not, as simple as kind of just of kind of going along with your life. But I think that this is something that you can do and continue to include more and more people into that circle, and can really help to make some of the different goals a possibility. And then here's some more kind of next steps you can think about. One other item that I always want families to complete is the letter of intent. And what this is, we actually have a downloadable version on our website that you can complete, fill in. It's a fillable PDF, send off to if there's any siblings or any other family members or friends that are in your circle, that really would be helpful for them to have a copy of, just because I think that, I thought that I was really the best sister ever. And I went through that with my mother, and I realized, oh my gosh, there actually was a lot of stuff that I did not know that, goes on in my brother's life. So I think it's just a helpful tool to sit across the dining room table and go through, with with the different people in your child's life. Can't say enough how important that is, and even especially when thinking about housing, because everything needs to tie together to be able to create that housing plan. So create your financial framework. So review your income and your expenses and review the different assets that you have. Again, every single situation is so very different and what the needs are. So, looking at what person has insignificant wealth or modest wealth, it's more of a combination of what do you have, how much do you spend. It's amazing. Some people can have these extremely high incomes, but they're spending every single penny. So you would think that they have, maybe significant wealth. But again, it really depends on what the family's overall financial situation is, how much they're spending, how much they're saving, to be able to determine, what they're able to potentially spend in the future for their child. So we kind of go through a process when we develop a plan where we first make sure the parents are financially secure and then layer in planning for their child with special needs, making some different, decisions and updates as things go along. So really important to gather the people, those human assets. I kind of tease and think that those are even more important than some of these, financial assets. The people, those are the things, and the people are the ones that make our family members, again, the life so great. And you can't buy those. So it's important to spend some time kind of, connecting if there's siblings, if there's not siblings. We always say people are lucky to have family, people are lucky not to have family. So it really is just kind of looking at who's in your circle and developing that and making that as broad as possible. And, breaking off those 5 factors of special needs planning. You want to make sure that you already have your estate plan in place, kind of just doing some different administrative tasks to get those things in place is really important. And then, of course, this is not, again, a set it and forget it. This is something that you'll want to review and monitor on an ongoing basis. So that's pretty much my presentation for the day. I wanted to allow for some time for questions. I do see a couple of questions over here. So you have a Section 8 voucher. Is it okay, Carrie, if I just kind of start answering some of these questions over here and then people can submit some more?
Yes, please do.
Great. So I see if you have a Section 8 voucher, can you have a roommate? So you can have a roommate, but I believe they probably would have to also fall within some income and housing. And for example, my father was trustee many years ago on a situation, and for an older gentleman, and he had a Section 8 voucher, but not everyone in the home had a Section 8 voucher. So not everyone has to have one, but every single person living in that home would have qualified for one. And I'm not sure exactly on what the rules are, but not everyone has to have a voucher. And there is a rule for Section 8 that technically you're not supposed to be able to rent to a family member, but if your family member has a disability, there is an exception. So you can rent to them. So that's something a lot of people have maybe gone pushback from their local housing authority, saying that they couldn't, but you can. So kind of know the rules. We always say yes, yes, yes. Usually there is some loophole or something when it comes to planning for this. So, just continue to trudge along. So, are there any other questions or comments, or hope this went in the right direction? So technically, your child, even if they're on SSI or SSDI, can own a home. We often, I think it really is specific. So from a government benefits perspective, yes, they can own a home. Not sure if that's the best way to own a property, though, because they potentially could be a lien for Medicaid in the future if they use a lot of Medicaid services. So, I think that is very unique. But again, a person with a disability certainly can own a home, and one home would not count against them for government benefits. They can also have a car. But again, I think it really is very specific.
Okay. Hi, Alex. This is Carrie again. We did have a question from Doreen. When you say significant wealth versus modest wealth, how is that defined or measured? Does that include retirement funds? We are retired and living off our nest egg, which we need to live on for our retirement life. Do these funds get counted?
So those funds would get counted for you if you are applying for government benefits. But looking at your family's overall wealth situation, kind of where you should be spending your time, we do look at the parents' assets to see what is are there enough resources for you to be able to supplement your child and pay for, say, rent, or pay for someone to come in and check in on your child a couple times a week. So it really depends on what the support needs are of the child to determine where the family would fit in, whether it's modest wealth, significant wealth. So it's kind of a blend between the amount of resources that a family has and what the needs are. So there's not really a definition or a number. If you look at the typical kind of financial planning, they do kind of put, significant wealth, high net worth, for example, would be about 10 million. I'm looking at much smaller numbers here, but I think that you can kind of fall within. It's kind of looking at, are you able to save on a week-to-week basis? If so, then yes, you will be accessing government benefits, but potentially also using some personal resources. So we often kind of look at your entire lifetime. Are there going to be resources remaining when the second spouse passes away? If so, is that going to be enough to supplement or pay for different housing supports? And then that's where we kind of figure out where you would fall.
Okay, thanks, Alex. And then Theola had a question. If you remodel to create an apartment in our home for our son, are there any loans or interest plans that can be used?
There is, and Kathy Boyle through Autism Housing Pathways has done a great job advocating for this. And I think it's also through like MRC. I can follow up with you. I actually have a handout on this that I got at a conference at Mass Commission for the Blind. I believe it's like a $10,000 loan potentially you'd be able to receive. Don't hold me to this, but it's around $10,000 you'd be able to receive potentially, and not have to repay until your child moves out of the home. Or you would sell your home.
Yeah, you can also, Mass Rehab Commission has that information. It's called the Home Loan Modification Program. So if you go on mass.gov and you go to Massachusetts Rehabilitation Commission, you can find that.
Perfect. Thanks, Carrie.
No problem. Let's see, got a couple more questions
and so
here.
If you are doing any revisions to your home, I do suggest definitely going to the zoning, to go to your housing authority or your zoning board, because some towns would tell you to actually unbuild if you're not doing it through kind of the different rules and bylaws of the town. So really important. Massachusetts is pretty specific on how you can update your home.
Okay. And then Doreen had a question. What if you were notified that you were granted a Section 8 housing voucher by your local housing authority, but it has not been issued yet due to budget constraints? How can we verify that? What are the insurances do we have that will receive it?
So I have never heard of them telling you that it's been issued, but then that they're not able to give it to you because of budget constraints. So that's pretty specific. I would probably go down to the housing authority and talk to someone and see what they were referring to and if they know timing on when. Obviously this is something that it's not really an entitlement. If you not sure if they can give you any assurances that you'll be able to receive it. I would just have open communication with them as much as possible. I am not sure what. Oh, 50,000. Thanks, Jean. So, yeah, I'm not sure. I would just talk with them. If they said they were going to give you a Section 8, I would just have a conversation with them and see what timing. I know that, for my brother, when they told my parents that they were going to be getting a Section 8 voucher, we were given a very short amount of time to be able to actually use it. So usually we hear the opposite, that we've been given a Section 8 voucher, what do we do now? Because usually, again, the supports are harder to find in the physical structure. So, you can kind of have the housing authority wait and hold that Section 8 voucher, but again, it's all about communication. Continue to talk with them, tell them what your next steps are, that you've been looking for, a Section 8 apartment, maybe talking to them about this apartment that you found, because a Section 8 is tied to the town and, the rental agreement of that town and what the cost would be. So downtown Boston, for example, you get a much higher Section 8 voucher than if you were in Taunton. So kind of looking at, you know, maybe having conversation with them about that too. Not sure.
All righty, thank you. How about anybody else? Anybody else have any questions? All righty, so I think that's about it. So I want to thank, oh, okay. So Jane did have a question. I bought a condo for my son. Is there any help for utilities?
Yes. So there are different, you can, there are like food snaps, you get this for food, you can get food, and then also there are some different utility programs as well. I don't have any links or anything for them. I know that there are some. Does anybody have any links or anything they can provide for her?
Catholic Charities was mentioned. You know, I would go, you know, in terms of utilities, I mean, at National Grid, you know, if you get gas and electric, they may have some provisions that, you know, they do have provisions so that your utilities would not be shut off, but I'm not sure about any other kind of discounts. And then Mary Catherine also said that the Salvation Army does provide some support for utilities. Okay, and then we have room for one more question. We have moved into another town since we were notified we would get the voucher. Do we have to go now to our new town, even though our prior housing authority notified us that we were granted a voucher, even though it has not yet been issued?
This seems like it's very, very, very specific. I would probably go to whoever told you that they received the voucher. I would go to whoever gave you the voucher, I would go to them. Be happy to talk to you after too, but I would just have a conversation with the person that told you that you're going to be receiving a voucher and see what's going on with it.
Yeah. All right, so that's our time is up. I wanted to thank Alex for a great presentation. That all of you that have registered for this workshop will receive a copy of the PowerPoint as well as a link to the recorded session on our YouTube channel. And at the end, you're going to be rerouted to a brief survey just on your webinar experience. And I want to thank you for your participation and thank Alex for a terrific presentation. And everybody have a great day.
Thank you. Take care.